How does a heat wave lower oxygen? Fish YouTubers say warmer tanks hold less oxygen. I've watched videos saying why is that? Kills fish through why do people say hot weather fish need more oxygen? Why are fish more at risk during the summer heat?
Make it make sense! Yes, the fact that we're getting these questions tells me two things. First of all, it tells me that the temperatures outside here in the UK are getting up towards the levels that the history books at least used to refer to as something called summer. Not today though, of course it's raining. And with that comes every YouTuber and Fishbook Face user telling you that warmer water doesn't hold as much oxygen as cooler water and that you should be afraid, very afraid of that. But the second thing it tells me is that this is not being explained very well. Because if you're coming here for an explanation, this pokey little startup channel, what's everybody else telling you? Now, after a bit of back and forth with a few of the people that have asked the questions, it seems that the main hang-ups are, they seem to be arbitrary numbers that are just plucked out of the air, 50%, 100% more oxygen requirement. And you're being warned about something, this danger, without any sort of quantification. And I get it. It's very much like me running up to you and saying, be careful, there's a wild animal coming. And you are just sort of left there thinking, well,
how bad is that?
Because what are we talking about? Is it a lion or a mouse? Like, what do I need to do? How scared do I need to be? And how serious is that? So really what it boils down to is they cannot tell you. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try and give you some sort of context. I'm going to give you some sort of clarification. And by the end of it, you'll kind of understand why they don't actually tell you. And to help me try and do that, I have a new one of these. Yes, it's bigger than the old one. Whiter too. And as you can see, I have professionally installed it using only the very best Aqua One airline. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some numbers and we're going to try to understand exactly what happens during a temperature spike or heat wave, if you want to call it that. Ways around it, the common ways that you're often told, and probably what my plan of action would be. Now, I know the glare is probably bloody horrendous, but what this says is warm water doesn't hold as much oxygen as cooler water. Now, the main issue with this, whilst this is a true statement and this is what you are told, there is a much truer statement. And what we should be saying is not this, but this. It cannot hold as much water. It physically, scientifically cannot hold as much water. And that is a very, very important distinction, because when somebody says it doesn't, that allows you to think in your mind, well, what can I do to make it? When you say it can't, it cannot do it. Okay, you just accept that. It cannot do it. You now know that there is nothing you can do to improve the level of oxygen that that water can hold. So you can concentrate on other things. That is an important distinction. So when I tell you that warmer water cannot hold as much oxygen as cooler water, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about saturation. Saturation is the peak, the absolute cap of the amount of oxygen that the water can hold. You will have seen examples of saturation when you see a planted tank purling. So if you don't know what that is where small bubbles are released directly from the leaves and they make their way to the surface of the tank. They are not dispersed into the water like they normally would be, because the water cannot physically hold anymore. It's like watching a toddler try to pick up all of their cuddly toys at the same time. Every time they pick up the last one, another one falls out. They are at cuddly toy saturation. So when water is at an oxygen saturation, it can't hold anymore. Now, it can be dictated or manipulated or influenced by several factors. But this being a heat wave video, we are mostly concerned about temperature. Now, the temperatures that we're going to look at through this video are 20, 25, that is a 5, I promise you, and 30 degrees Celsius. Now, why those temperatures? Well, 20 is a great starting place for your temperate fish. So like CPDs, reticulated tailstream loaches, that sort of stuff. 25, that's your normal community sort of fish, like your tetras, your cherry barbs. And then 30, well, 30 is kind of the temperature that here in the UK everybody seems to fear. Oh, it was at 30 degrees, is everything going to be okay? More than likely, yeah, unless maybe you've got fish that prefer this. For us, the heat wave isn't generally ever an issue because most of our fish have this or slightly above all year round. But what are the actual numbers? So it's measured in milligrams per liter, and you will see very quickly that it drops from 9.1 to 7.6 with, I think it's 8.3 in the middle. So you can see there that it is getting less and less and less. Now, as a percentage to try and help quantify that, and this will come up on Facebook, because somebody will go, oh, it's actually not that much less. And they're right. This is only about 8% less, and this is only actually about 8% less. But overall, we are looking at 16 to 17% decrease if you have a 10-degree temperature swing. Now, yes, elevation, altitude also plays a part. It's important to know that these numbers are at sea level. Every meter that you go above sea level, so unless you live on the coast, these numbers will drop ever so slightly. We are not going to take that into consideration because the rule of thumb is for every 1,000 meters above sea level, these numbers drop by about 10%. Now, given that 80% of the entire globe's population lives below 500 meters, even if you are one of the highest living people on this planet, you're only looking at about a 5% swing. So we are just going to negate that for the purposes of this video. Now, people often ask, well, what happens to the oxygen in the water as the water temperature increases? Does it get used up? Does it just deplete? What happens to it? Well, it's actually evacuated. The water cannot hold it. It gets expelled. So if we look at this glass of water, there is seemingly not a lot of movement. But if you've watched the KH video, which we'll kind of redo very, very soon, you will know that this is constantly moving. But we're not going to talk about the ionic production and the kW factor of water today. Just know that there's a lot going on in that seemingly still water. Now, these are your H molecules, your water, and these are your oxygens. Now, at 20 degrees, the vibration is very small and it can hold on to the oxygen. At 25 degrees, the vibration is more, but it's still holding on to this amount of oxygen. At 30 degrees, it can't. This has gone out the top of the aquarium and is dispersed into the atmosphere. This is probably a good point to say that if this is feeling a bit in depth and a bit sciencey, bear with me because it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I promise you it will all sort of come together at the end and give you a foundational knowledge to understand why what you're doing is either working or potentially there are better routes to take. Okay, so for now we're just going to try and sort of make this a little bit more relatable, because knowing how much oxygen is in your aquarium is great, but if you don't have any idea of what the fish could potentially want, what does that mean? Because that is the real issue. It's not necessarily the fact that the water can't hold as much oxygen. It's that in times of stress, as you are always told, fish need more. As temperature increases, we all know that their metabolism increases, and that means their respiration system or respiratory system also increases. So this is what we're going to look at, okay? Now, we have a 100-liter aquarium here with nothing else in it. It's just water. It's at sea level and at maximum saturation, okay? This water holds as much oxygen as it physically can. Now, to make this a worst-case scenario, the oxygen in this water cannot be replaced. That would never happen. We know that gas exchange happens at the surface, and you can manipulate that by increasing the surface agitation, all right? Now, we know that. This is just worst-case scenario. Now, we're going to say that these neon tetras weigh 1 gram. Neon tetras don't weigh 1 gram, but they're the chubby neon tetras, okay? So collectively, we have 10 grams of biomass. Now, they are going to collectively consume 10 milligrams of O2 per kilogram per hour, okay? Now, at 20 degrees Celsius in 100 liters of water, we have 910 milligrams of oxygen. At 25 degrees, we have 830 milligrams. And we have 760 milligrams in the 30 degrees water because it's at maximum saturation, okay? That is our oxygen reserve. Now, assuming that the oxygen cannot be replenished, and assuming that the fish can access every little bit of oxygen in that water, what happens? How long have you got? Well, you would have 91 hours, you would have 83 hours, and 76 hours until all oxygen is gone. Now that looks like 3.8 days, 3.5 days, and 3.2 days. Okay, so nothing to worry about. The heat wave will be over by then. But the point is what we said earlier, as the temperature increases, so does their metabolism. So the danger is not really that this holds less oxygen, because the difference there isn't huge. But the problem is with these fish, if this, say they're CPDs, and this is where they want to be, when we increase it to here, they want more oxygen. So this can't be this number, it must be less. And if it's all the way up here, they're going to want even more. So this is going to be even less. How do we try to quantify that? Well, this is where the maths really comes in. This is something everybody who's really into fish, nerd level, like me, knows. But it's not easy to understand. And this you will understand in a moment when I've gone through it, why they don't actually tell you. And it's because they can't. Okay, so this is the part of the video where we're going to address those seemingly arbitrary numbers that seem to have been plucked out of thin air. When they tell you that your fish may need 50 to 100% more oxygen during a heat wave. But let me tell you, it can be worse than that. Some fish will require 200, 300 times the oxygen that they would normally require in their comfortable temperature zone. And that comes down to this, Q10. Now, Q10 is a scientific term for the rate that a biological process, in this case, the fish's metabolism and respiratory system, increases over a 10 degrees Celsius increase. That's where the 10 comes from. It is all about factors of 10 degrees. Now, it works very well for aquariums in this video because we were looking at a difference between 20 and 30. 25 obviously being in the middle there, we will address that. So this is how we actually work out what the oxygen requirements of your fish are. It's all very basic. Everybody knows this, but if you're new, you wouldn't. Let's get into it. Okay, so now I'm going to run you through one of the most important equations in the fish keeping hobby. This is no secret. Every fish nerd knows this. I will do it as clearly and as slowly as I can because it is important that if you do not know this, that you do know this. This is how you would see it written in studies. Okay, this is the full scientific breakdown. Okay, now we'll run through it. R2 is what we're looking for. We are looking for the new rate. So this is the second rate, the elevated rate of respiration. R1, this is our known starting base. So in the case of this, it's 10 milligrams per hour, okay? But we'll input the numbers just in a minute. The Q10, this is our Q10 factor. And then up here, we have a change in temperature divided by 10 because it's divided by 10. That's just how the equation works. So the Q10 is where this really sort of falls down. It is the most important bit of the equation, but the reason other YouTubers or Facebook people don't tell you is because there isn't a huge database out there with every fish on that tells you its Q10 factor. And the reason for that is not every fish has been studied to that extent, and it can change throughout a fish's lifestyle. So take the zebrafish, the zebra danio, one of the most studied and experimented on fish in the entire world, okay? It has several Q10 factors throughout its lifestyle. Now, don't quote me directly because I don't keep them. I've never researched it. But I believe, if memory serves correctly, as an embryo, their Q10 is massive. It's between 3.5 and 5, depending on situations. There are a lot of things that could impact that. As they get into the sort of size that you would be buying them from a shop, it's slowed down to around about 2. And as they get older, old people, they struggle, they need more to keep going. It's up around the 4 again. Now, there are marine fish as low as 1.5. So it is different for every species. So the reason they don't tell you an exact number is because it varies species to species and environment to environment, okay? Now, Q10, we can sort of subsidize. There is a general rule of thumb because it is a very, very good sort of average, and that is 2.4. That is generally, unless it is a known quantity, how you work this one out, okay? And then as we get over here, it's just a change in temperature over 10. So if we actually input the numbers and solve this equation, we have R2 equals 10 milligrams per hour. That's our known quantity, times 2.4, our estimated Q10 value. And our change in temperature, to make this as relatable as possible, we're going to go for 30 degrees in a heat wave. And 25 is where you wanted your temperature. So this is going to be the most relatable thing, all right? It's going to be a little bit more complicated to work out, but we're looking at a 5-degree increase. So for those of you that would be keeping your neon tetras at 24, 25, and now we're looking at a heat wave of 29, 30, okay? So then we have our 2 equals 10 times 2.4. Solve the brackets, gives us 5. Everybody understand that? 30 minus 5 over 10, which is the exact same as saying R2 equals 10 times 2.4. Where's this? This is half to the power of 0.5. Now, 0.5 is always the square root. So the square root, actually we could section that off. Let's not get that confused, shall we? Okay, bad teacher, bad teacher. The square root of 2.4 is 1549. Now we divide it by 10, so we have to times by 10, which is rounding up, giving us 15.5 milligrams per hour. So the increase in the oxygen demand of your neon tetras that have a Q10 factor of 2.4, which has been assumed, the 10 milligrams of oxygen consumption per hour is a good basis for 10 neon tetras. They have an oxygen requirement of 55% extra. Should we have a look at something that may have a higher Q10? Because it doesn't have to have a massive Q10 to have a big impact down here. I'll scrub that off. So we'll run through this again. It's exactly the same, but the Q10 is going to be 3. So a slightly higher rate of increase in metabolic rate and respiratory rate. So we know that our R1 value is still 10 times elevated Q10 of 3 instead of 2.4. We'll keep the temperatures the same. And that's what we're looking at. Now, again, this works out to be 5 over 10, which is the same as 0.5. So with all the steps that we did earlier, we're looking at 10 times 3 to the power 0.5, which, because it's to the power 0.5, again, is just the square root of 3, which is 1.73, which is 17.3 milligrams per hour, where it used to be 10 milligrams per hour, which is a percentage increase of 73%. 73% oxygen requirement increase at just a 5-degree temperature increase. So let's have a look at a really bad scenario. We'll go back down to the often average assumed Q10 of 2.4. But say you are keeping your reticulated tail stream loaches like we do at 20 degrees Celsius. What happens when they hit 30? What are their oxygen requirements then? Now, before somebody gets hung up on the fact that I said reticulated heel stream loaches and then savages me in the comments, let's forget that, because they probably do require more than 10 milligrams per hour as standard. So let's just imagine it's CPDs, okay? You're keeping them at 20 degrees, temperature's got up to 30. So we're going to keep the 10 milligrams per hour. We're going to keep the 2.4 for the Q10 because that is the accepted sort of go-to guesstimate. And the temperatures are horrendous, 30 degrees where we wanted it at 20. Now, because of this over here, it makes the math so much easier because 30 minus 20 is 10. I hope we all agree on that. And 10 over 10 is the same as 1, which means we're not dealing with square roots and we're not dealing with to the power of 0.5. So what we actually end up with is just 2.4 times 1. Now, remember earlier when I said that when they tell you that your fish may require 50 to 100% more oxygen than they did to start with? Look at that. That is 240% of their original oxygen requirement. This is why 10 degrees can be absolutely lethal. Now you understand the foundations. Now you understand why people do seemingly just pluck numbers out of the air, because there isn't a database for this. We can't just go on there and research your particular fish. And it changes throughout a fish's lifestyle. But 2.4 is the best way to go. If you are really into it and you really want to look it up, if there have been studies done on your fish where they have put them into respirators, and they do, to calculate how much oxygen they require over a given hour. It's normally done in per kilogram per hour, but they will give you how many milligrams that they consume. You can now work that out. It's probably not going to serve you any good, but now you understand. That is the bit that apparently nobody else tells you. Well, I promise that is the end of the really nerdy stuff, okay? If you made it this far, give yourself a pat on the back. Please consider liking and subscribing. It costs you nothing, and I always get told off for not. They call it call to actioning. And if you've actually found it informative, I would really, really appreciate hitting the hype button, which I honestly don't even know what that does, but I've been told I should mention it, okay? I know I'm not the best at explaining stuff, so let's bring it back around to our hypothetical 100-litre aquarium with our 10 morbidly obese wild shrimp neon tetras in. Now, earlier we agreed that 20 degrees Celsius gave us 91 hours of survival, assuming that we were at sea level, maximum saturation, and that weirdly the oxygen could not be replenished in here. But again, only if the fish could access all of the dissolved oxygen, which they wouldn't be able to. And that gave us a survival of 3.8 days. Now at 30 degrees Celsius, that same fish, that same bioload, because the oxygen reserve is now not 910 milligrams total in that volume of water, it's only 760. Again, best case scenario, if you live above sea level, it's not quite that much. Okay, there are lots of other things that come into it. With the elevated rate that they need oxygen, we are now looking at a survival of 1.3 days. And that really is best case scenario. Let's be honest. You will not have just 10 1-gram neon tetras, no matter how chubby they are, in a 100-litre tank. You likely have corridors, you likely have some other top-dwelling, mid-dwelling fish. You may even have a pleco in there, and they are big oxygen consumers. You likely live slightly above sea level. So that isn't that anyway. And was it even that? How much surface agitation did you have to start with? The fish would have already been in there, they would have already been consuming oxygen. So it's probably not even that. So yeah, a 10-degree increase can really be devastating in less than a day when we look at it at real world scenarios. But obviously we were talking hypothetically that the oxygen could not be replenished, which would never happen because oxygen would be coming in through the gas exchange that happens at the surface. Now, which is going to be better? Reducing the temperature or increasing surface agitation? That's the thing. Because you'll quite often see people say, well, you know, put an air stone in. Great. Great. How much can that air stone actually replenish in a given hour over reducing the temperature and thus allowing you to have a higher cap? Which one is actually better? Do we want to put an air stone in, which will marginally decrease the temperature as long as there is some sort of wind movement for evaporative cooling, and try to reach this? Or do we want to reduce the temperature and try and have a maximum capacity of that? we should probably have a look through some of the ways that I have been told over the years, and I've seen other people told, to deal with heat waves. So for a lot of you, this is probably the useful bit. Okay, so what we've got here is a list of advice that I've seen handed out quite regular, some more often than it really should be. If there's anything, and likely there is, that I've forgotten to put on here that you've heard or you would advise, drop it in the comments below, because not only does it help out the algorithm for me to reach other people, but it will also help the people who read the comments. And believe me, there are quite a few. So to start with, we've got air stone, then evaporative cooling, and drip cooling. They're in green because turning off the lights. That's in yellow, mostly because my 5-year-old stole my orange. And it's kind of situational. It can be good, but it can also be very bad. And then in red, we've got turning off filtration, adding ice, big water changes, and lowering the water level. Now, if you're looking at those thinking, what a fool, there are some logic behind those, which may, to some people, make it seem like a good idea. And perhaps it is, but it is very experience and time heavy. So let's start with an air stone. It's probably the most commonly advised method around increasing the air. Now, I'm sure all of us here understand that it's really not the bubbles that they create that add oxygen to the air, and it is the surface agitation as well as the mixing effect. The lower an air stone is, the further down it can drag water from the bottom and mix it with the top, thus sort of staving off striation, where water becomes stratified into different levels where you would have different temperatures and different oxygen levels. In doing that, you are creating surface agitation. Now, surface plants can hinder that massively. Only just by touching the surface of the water, they are stopping gas exchange already. But if you have a fine mat of like water lettuce or duckweed, it will stop the effect of your air stone because it's not able to ripple as much. How much air are you even putting through this air stone? It's not really quantifiable. There is no sort of rule of thumb per how many 100 liters of aquariums to how much 100 liters of air you need to put through an air stone. And would you put 100 liters an hour through one air stone? Or 100 liters an hour through 2 air stones, 50 each? Which is better? You could argue that the 100 liters an hour gives more turnover, but more surface agitation comes from the 250s. The size of the tank. I mean, what surface area are we dealing with? How much agitation do we really need? And then you've got depletion versus restoration. And this is where the air stone sort of falls down as a single set and forget method. So we go back to our neon tetras, which are now consuming 24 milligrams of oxygen per hour because they were at 10 and it was times 2.4. Okay, because we've gone from 20 to 30. All right, it's just a rough thing. In this instance, if your air stone is only adding 10 or restoring 10 milligrams per hour over not having an air stone, you are still at a deficit of 14. So you are still going to run out of oxygen. No, I'm not saying run out and buy an oxygen meter, because that's just not practical and frankly ridiculous. But an air stone is a tick, but not necessarily on its own. It is a great tool to have and I highly recommend it, but it needs to go hand in hand with other things. Next up is evaporative cooling. Now this is kind of my number one. Those two in combination is just my go-to. That is the action plan. Okay, so evaporative cooling, what is that? That is where the water evaporates and takes temperature with it. It's great, it's fantastic. If you've got an open top tank, you know about evaporation. So how do we do that? If you've got a lid on your tank, open the lid. Get rid of that humid barrier that is actually working very well at keeping the temperature in. Open the lid. Add a fan if you can. It doesn't have to be directly on it, although aquarium fans are available. You can mount them on the top and they do a fantastic job, because not only do they add oxygen flow over the top or airflow over the top, they also can increase a little bit of surface agitation depending on the power and how close they are. So a fan is great. If you don't have access to a fan, or you don't want a fan operating maybe when you're out of the house, if you can, open windows. One at either end works fantastic, and that's what we have. But surface agitation as well. If you can open the lid, get some cross cooling going on, so air moving over the top of the tank, and agitate the surface with your air stone or raising your filter, you have got the trifecta of evaporative cooling. And that is going to do everything you want. It is going to slowly reduce the temperature. It is also going to be adding air or oxygen back in basically as well as you can. So evaporative cooling, that is definitely on my list. Drip cooling. That's one that doesn't really get passed around a lot, and it is definitely one of my go-tos. I use it quite often, not just to reduce the temperature in a heat wave, but when triggering corridors to spawn, like the similis, spawn pretty much anytime you want. Now, drip cooling is essentially just dripping cooler water into the aquarium. Now, it does sort of require you to have an elevated platform, a shelf. Another tank is what we've got up here. And then this tank is where we want the water to go. Now, I just get a 10-litre water container. Make sure that whatever you're going to put your water container on is strong enough to take it, because this is what I use when I'm leaving the house, and you do not want to come home to find a horrendous mess. So execute caution with this. Then simply start a siphon, tie a knot in the airline. Looking for one here. It's not out here at the moment, but essentially we are just putting airline in this water container and slowly dripping it, which will be controlled by either a valve or, adjusting how tight the knot is, and it will drip cool water into your warmer water tank. It will stabilize the temperature, if not drop it, but you can control the flow and how long it lasts for. So I will generally use reverse osmosis water, which is kept outside in a shed, which will be maybe 20 degrees, and it will help in a 30-degree environment to slowly stabilize that. It doesn't do much for oxygenation. You also need to know how much water you're adding. So before I do this, I will remove, say, 10 liters, the known quantity from this, and then I will add 10 liters back. And then I can walk away, safe in the knowledge it is not going to overflow, and it is stabilizing and cooling as it happens. Next up, we've got turning off lights. And that's not a happy face, but it's not a sad face, because turning off lights has some logic behind it, but it's kind of situational. So why would you turn off the lights? You would turn off the lights to reduce the heat. It's not one-to-one, but if you are running sort of a 50-watt LED, they produce a fair bit of heat. Now, if you haven't opened your lid for evaporative cooling, that heat is likely staying inside. So if you are going to keep your lights on, definitely open your lid. Reducing heat by turning the lights off sounds absolutely brilliant, but it kind of depends on whether you have a planted or a non-planted tank. You see, it all comes down to photosynthesis. Plants are oxygenators. I need to leave my light on so that they are oxygenating the water. Think of it the other way. If you turn them off, they are consuming oxygen. If it is dark, they are removing oxygen as well as your fish, and as well as the bacteria, and as well as every other living organism in that volume of water. So if you turn your lights off and it's dark enough, you've now got more competition. So what can you do? If you can, and you have a heavily planted tank, my advice would be try to keep light at a level where photosynthesis will still be happening and the oxygen will still be being released. But if you have fairly high light plants, see if you can just raise your lighting above the aquarium. Just keep the heat as far away as you can. If you've got low light plants like Anubias, Bucophilandra, Java ferns, chances are they'd be fine with you turning the lights off. But you want to keep a state of photosynthesis, and being low light plants, the chances are if you open the lid and just leave the room light on, they will still be able to photosynthesize. And it's not so much that they will be adding oxygen, it's that they're not removing it. And that is more the key factor. Turning off filtration. If you're anything like me, your response to that is, huh? Because why would you do that? And yeah, do not turn your filtration off. The gentleman who actually does this is a very well-known and very accomplished breeder who will remain nameless for this, just because this is not something that is commonly known about him. But what he does is it's powered filtration, and that's the problem. Powered filtration, whether it be internal, external, or even a hang-on back, will add an element of heat to the water. So if it's powered filtration, there is an argument to turn it off, reducing heat transfer. If it's air-powered filtration, your sponge filters, that sort of stuff, definitely don't turn them off, because you want the surface agitation that they are creating. Now what he does is he puts them on a timer. They run for 45 minutes and turn off for 15, because in the 15 minutes of oxygen depletion, the bacteria are not suffering, but he is saving 15 minutes of heat transfer. It is also not enough to create heat swings. So it's not like the tank is going to be 30 degrees, the filter shut off for 15 minutes, and now it's 26. That's not the case, but it helps stave off the increase in temperature. It slows it down. He does it on a timer. Okay, there is an argument for that. It works very well for him. If you don't have timers set up for it, don't do it. Because there will be that one time you forget to turn it back on. And even if your fish somehow survive it, after a couple of hours, your bacteria in the filter are dead. Yes, the bacteria in the tank are probably still all right, but you're just running risks of ammonia and nitrite spike. Just don't do it. Yeah, my advice, just don't do it. Adding ice is the next one. Now, in the really hot countries, I'm sure this is a lot more common, and maybe there is cause to do it. But because it is a common occurrence for you guys, you're probably more practiced at it. Now, for people in the UK and this sort of part of the world, I would say don't do it. And the reasons for that are, if you add ice cubes, did you dechlorinate your ice cubes? I had that come up. Now, unless you're one of those preppers, you probably didn't. You've rushed out and gone, oh, get some ice in there. How much chlorine or chloramine is going to be in those ice cubes? I don't really think, unless you add a lot, I don't think it's going to affect your bacteria that much at all. My advice in not doing it is because it will create cool spots, and it will seemingly do nothing until you add too much. And thermal shock is a much more immediate death than oxygen depletion. Now you're battling two things. And lowering a temperature and then, oh, I've lowered it too much, now what do I do? And then like trying to raise it again. And it will raise inevitably over time anyway, once your little ice cubes have disappeared. Stability is king, right? So for me, adding ice is a no. Now, add a frozen bottle of water. Okay, so a frozen bottle of water is one big mass. It will last longer because it's keeping itself cooler for longer, but it is also affecting a larger area. It solves the chlorine and the chloramine problem, but it adds a level of, you need to have been ready for this, you have to have prepared for this, and you also need to be there to monitor the effects. Whereas with these three, you don't. Now, big water changes. Maybe they should have been yellow because it is an option, but it's an extreme option. Better would be small, frequent water changes with marginally cooler water. Again, like adding the ice, you are at risk of thermal shock. Yes, we've talked about 20 or 25, the ideal temperatures being better for your fish, but a large drop, a sudden decrease in temperature and thermal shock setting in is much more stressful for you, for the fish, and again, it's time consuming. You have to be there. If the weather forecast says it's going to be 33, 34 degrees, just as you're leaving for work, you don't have time for that. So situationally, yes, for people who are experienced in doing it, okay. But for me, that's a no. All pretty standard, all pretty obvious so far. Now, the one that really stopped me and made me think was lowering the water level. And it made me stop for a second. Now, before you think, what? The girl who suggested it yesterday actually had some pretty sound thinking behind it. I could see where the logic was going, all right? So her argument was, what we are told and what we tell newbies all the time is get a bigger tank, it's cheaper to run. Why? Because the more water volume you have, the better it holds its temperature. So her logic thinking was, if we reduce the water volume, then it can't hold its temperature as well. Okay, sound thinking. We've applied some foundational knowledge somewhere else. The problem is that doesn't work. Because if you reduce the volume of water, the outside temperature is still the same. You are having no cooling effect on it at all. And the smaller volume of water will heat quicker and reduce quicker. So if you've done it in the morning before peak temperature, it's now going to climb faster than if you'd left it alone. If you do it in the afternoon, just after the peak, it's now going to drop faster. So now we're getting into the stability issues. but it's worse than that, okay? Let's get extreme. Let's say she's dropping it from the 100 liters to 50 liters. She's going to remove half. Now, let's go with 30 degrees C, which we know has 7.6 milligrams per liter of oxygen, okay? Now, the 50 liters still has that because that is just a ratio. The problem there lies in how much oxygen is in the water in total. Now, in 100 liters at 7.6, if it's still 100% saturated, we haven't started losing any oxygen yet, but we would have, so these numbers are going to be even less. At 100, you're looking at 760 milligrams in total available to the fish. In a 50, you've now only got 380. So it did make me stop, and it did make me think, just for that split second. I was like, well, no, now you've actually reduced the amount of oxygen available faster than the heat ever would have. Okay? So don't do that. The reason it's kind of situational is if you do not have an air stone available, say you cannot open the lid because it's a rimless tank. You don't have the facility to drip cool. You have turned off the lights, or you've raised the lights. You've done all of these things, but you don't have an air stone available. All you have available is some sort of internal filter. If you reduce the level, let's get a different. If you reduce the level from your internal filter, which is putting out water here, if you did reduce the level to here, she couldn't mount this any higher because it would be out of the tank. Now, by reducing the water level, what we have now done is created a waterfall effect, which has massively increased the surface agitation. Now, as long as you're not really reducing that water by more than 15% volume, that could work. That has value, it has merit to it. Any more than 20% though, get one of these, have it on hand, and if you can, have a fan or windows open in the room. So my action plan, if my fish were likely to suffer in a 30-degree environment, which they don't, they have it all the time, it would be increase surface agitation, however that looks, okay? Adding air stones, putting the filter slightly out of the water. I would be aiming at evaporative cooling. 90% of our tanks have lids. The tank lids get opened, lights go off because I don't have heavily planted tanks. They are mostly epiphytes, and the sunlight coming in through both windows, which are, by the way, open, is enough to keep that room illuminated to the point where they are still producing oxygen rather than consuming it. I don't turn off filtration. I don't add ice. I don't do big water changes, and I don't lower the water level other than through evaporative cooling. And that is because I don't want to sit here all day monitoring. How many fish in the last 22 years have I lost to a heat wave? None. Not a single thing. And yes, at the moment we keep a lot of zebra plecos and hot water loving fish, but it hasn't always been that way. I mean, I still breed cherry barbs. We've got CPDs upstairs in the hot room. And these are steps that I take for those fish. Those, air stone, evaporative cooling, drip cool if necessary. If I genuinely think that it's going to get really, really hot and I can't be here, drip cooling will be set up. But that is situational. You need to have an elevated position to siphon from. And I understand not everybody has that available. But if you do, it's brilliant. So that's kind of my take on it. That's my advice. I hope the first bit wasn't too sciencey. I guess it probably was for some people. And no, it doesn't really help because even understanding it without the actual numbers, but hopefully it helps you understand that it really is a serious issue. It can be detrimental very, very quickly. It can take just hours to wipe out a tank if you haven't prepared for it. Now, by the time this video comes out, it's probably too late. We've probably already had a massive heat wave in the UK. However, I will make a solemn promise to you now. I will not be one of those people that releases this video at the same time every year. This is it. Unless something drastic changes with fish keeping or thermal properties of water and air, that's it. This is the one video. You're not gonna look at my thing next year and say, oh, a new video. Oh, it's that again. No, I'm not that kind of bloke. We have covered it. That is the best of my ability, and that is it. I hope it was useful. If it was, please consider liking and subscribing and all that stuff. Please add your experiences in the comments. That'd be great. I appreciate everybody who takes the time to leave a comment, because it's effort, right? Liking and subscribing is nothing. Leaving a comment takes actual effort. Yeah, and I hope everybody finds a way to make a stranger smile today, and I hope you find a reason to smile too. And I'll see you in the next one. Take it steady.